Jim, Dave, good to see you guys. Thanks for coming back. You guys have become fan favorites of the Coffee and Mike podcast.
Mike. Well,
Mike.
I'm a big fan of the Mike podcast and all the other people who march through this portal.
People are like, "Where's
Yeah,
Kunstler?
you
Where's
know,
Collum?"
it's great to just chat. I mean, if someone wants to record it, that's great. You
Yeah.
know,
And Dave's a great favorite friend of mine, and I hardly ever get to talk to him except on your podcast
that's
because
right.
we live far apart.
Well, to me, it's always like, the biggest compliment I've ever gotten with this is like, I feel that people have written messages saying it feels like I'm at a coffee house listening to people chat. And that was always my goal with all this because I'm not a journalist. I'm not a writer. I'm not any of that. And for people to get that sense, I'm like, well, mission accomplished.
Yeah, you're doing a good job.
Thank you. Thank you to you
And,
both. Go ahead, Dave.
and there's stylistic differences where there are people who can orchestrate questions very precisely and do a good job. And then there's people who do the casual thing really well. And then there's the people in the middle who blow it, who stiffen their podcast right up with a bunch of rigid questions that seem unresponsive to what actually is happening. So you are the facilitator of casual discussion podcast style.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing this where you're asking the same like five questions or the origin.
No.
Like, oh, Jim, how did you get started? Oh, like because after a while, it probably gets old retelling that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to remind yourself that different podcasts have different readers and viewers. So um, yeah, I don't know what the Venn diagrams look like. I do find myself repeating shit. Um, but I don't know if I should because it's a different readership. Or I have people who say I watch every one of your podcasts. I go, God, may God have mercy on your soul. That's just appalling. So
I think we all sort of proceed from sort of mental templates that we have in our head
mhm.
of structured thought. And it is, you have to work a little bit to stay aware of that and break out of it if you can, because otherwise you do end up just being kind of a robot. So I don't know. Let's get into the meat of it.
Well, where I was going with that is it's in the news cycle today. There's so much every week. There's just new things to discuss, and I had Porter Stansberry on earlier, and tariffs, and here we are. They've gone into effect, and it's like, what's the impact? What's the impact it's going to have in the short term and potentially the long term?
Yeah. Well, in the short term, it sent the stock market down about 800 points this morning, and then it recovered later in the afternoon. And I'm not quite sure where it is closing. We'll see in about a second. Oh, it recovered a good 600 points. So,
look at the slope. Doesn't it look like the robots got a hold of it?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a classic sort of early dip, and then just the robotic buying kicks in, and it
Yeah,
just marches its way in a dead straight line. Who is it? The guy who unearthed Madoff. What was his name? Markopoulos.
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
said he said a straight line in finance is fraud.
yeah. Where this thing is going in the mid-term and long term, um, I am not sure that it's unhealthy at all for the U.S. I think the main consideration is that we have to get back into what's called import replacement. And import replacement is exactly what it sounds like. That you've been getting stuff from other places, and now you have to start making the stuff yourself because the conditions demand that. And it's a setup for us to some extent reindustrializing. Now, where I sort of demur from that a little bit is that I don't think that we're going to become the America of 1962 all over again.
No, no
You know,
chance.
we're going to reindustrialize in a different way, probably in ways that are not expected. One way that I do expect is a different scale of industrialization, because I think that one of the things that we're suffering from most acutely in the life of our nation and economy is over gigantism is a scale problem. We are doing too many things at the giant scale in a limited number of places by a limited number of actors. And we need to have more people doing more things on a smaller scale. And I think that will be healthier for our economy. And that applies not only to manufacturing, that is actually making, producing stuff, but also the whole business of commerce in that stuff, of moving it around and retailing it. That in fact, if there's any part of the picture that is the most grotesque, it's the retailing end of the picture in America with, half a dozen big box stores selling everything. And that has destroyed local economies like the small town that I'm in. And I've been convinced for a long time that that's going to change. Everybody thinks that Walmart and Best Buy are permanent installations in the national iconography. But I believe that like just about everything else in our life, they will pass on by and we'll arrive at a new disposition of things, especially the way we organize commerce in America. So, between commerce and production, that's those are two levels of it, and then there's the financial level of it, which is how does this activity get financed on a continually, dependably rolling basis. And one thing we know now is that our financial system is so screwed up that it requires some sort of a comprehensive reset.
I agree. I guess I'm not necessarily as optimistic that it will find its way. The idea bigger, smaller numbers of bigger companies is you almost describe fascism to a T when you do that, right?
Yeah.
Because if there's only 6 companies controlling the flow of almost everything, then the commandeering of the machinery of government becomes trivial.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I left out, by the way, which is that these changes that I'm describing are going to create a lot of heat and friction, which means a lot of disorder in the system. So, a lot of things will break, a lot of things will be lost in the process, and there's going to be a lot of damage that we're going to have to get through. So, Dave, what I described a few minutes ago, I don't think is going to be a smooth journey necessarily, but I do think it's a journey we're going to make.
Yeah, I call it the required going through the valley of death. I don't. It seems to be standing right between us and the promised land, to the extent that it exists, is the valley of death, and I don't see a way around it. I think we really do have to sort of raise the system, raise. That's always bothered me, the linguistic feel of raise.
Yeah.
It's like meteoric rise. I go, meteors fall. And I don't see a way around it, in part because, well, first of all, everything's overvalued. Everything's priced wrong.
Yes, exactly.
We've got a dashboard which is saying our tires are at full pressure. We're driving at 55. The gas tank's full, and I think they're all rigged numbers. And so, and that leads to big mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And then you find yourself with a flat tire appearing doing 90 miles per hour down the road without any gas left in the car, So yeah, I think the valley of death is in our future. It frustrates me when I read comments in the comment section for fun. And occasionally someone says, oh, you ought to look at this documentary or something. It's worth the time for me. It's like watching game films. And it frustrates me when someone says, oh, you've been saying that for years and years and years. I go, it is the accumulation of those years that is why we're going to get so fucked when it finally hits. It's like saying, well, you've been saying there's going to be an earthquake in California for 100 years. There isn't, so you're full of shit. I go, well, I don't think that's how those earthquakes work, dude. I think there's a Silas Marner quote that says, it's often cited, the absence of something is cited as the reason why it won't happen when it's actually evidence that it's imminent.
Yeah. Well, we know that there are these thresholds in all of these kinds of dynamic phenomena in avalanches and earthquakes and the
Bombs.
physics, the movements of things, and we're we're awfully close to some kind of a threshold, and we've had about 20 years of uh, the authorities interfering with the mechanism of price discovery, which is
Absolutely.
the primary mechanism of a market. There's almost no point in having markets if you don't have price discovery. And the distortions and perversions have accumulated so badly that you can expect an awful lot of damage when things slip, because there are an awful lot of things that are not only mispriced, they're valueless. And
Like the Mag 7.
well, there you go. Yeah.
The Mag 7. The Mag, I like to ask people rhetorically, when they write the chapter about the Mag 7, will it be a love story or a horror story? And I have no doubt it'll be a horror story. The
Yeah.
chapter entitled Magnificent Seven is not going to be about the creation of greatness in the United States. It's going to be a story of one of the great bubbles. And
Yeah.
and and it's also, there's indicators that I've sort of glommed onto, like the fact that private equity can still borrow money so cheaply that it's actually profitable to buy up companies, gut them for all their assets, destroy them, sell them into the open marketplace for what is obviously a ridiculous price, because at that point they should be worth nothing, and make big money doing it. So the fact that private equity firms can rape and pillage for profit is a sign that first of all, monetary policy is too loose. Those guys should have trouble getting capital.
Yeah, and that's the primary price of everything, which is the price of
Right,
capital, and that's the primary thing that's been mispriced.
right.
So, the distortions emanate from that and the perversities. So, uh, yeah, that all that stuff needs terribly badly to be corrected, and the correction is going to be a violent incident.
Does it?
And an existential risk, right?
Yeah, for a
I
lot of
mean,
people.
well, yeah, and for the system,
Hmm.
and somehow the assumption that the American system is self-repairing, which there's reason for optimism, because we do have some pretty optimal resource bases and things like that, and inland waterways and isolation from Europe and Asia
Hmm.
and things like that. But but empires do end, and to call the death of something is a risky bet, because it only happens once, and so you're not likely to be right. But there, I worry about it, and I have things like the equity market. I have a 200% over historical average valuation, which means you are either going to correct brutally, or you're priced to get roughly one third the return that you've gotten historically.
Yeah.
And if one third the historical return is going to bust the baby boomers into pieces.
Hmm.
They're counting on better.
Yeah, and they can't all be baggers at the local supermarket.
I don't think they're
There are
thinking
only
about
so
it
many
either.
there are
Yeah,
only
I
so
don't.
many bagging jobs.
d-
Yeah, I
d-
think we're going to destroy universities. I think I don't know
Yeah.
which ones. Probably not mine. It'll probably be a rotting from the not from the bottom, because I think community colleges are there for a reason. I think the university system will core from the middle.
Yeah, and that sort of fits with my notion of scale.
Right.
That I see the big state universities getting into a huge trouble, and but I think that many of the smaller organisms might survive. I don't think they're going to thrive. I think that higher education is going to become much more of a special elite activity, like it like it has been in the past, kind of a gentleman's finishing school.
Right.
Um,
By the
But
way, Wells College is right up the lake. It's been around since 1836, I think.
yeah,
It's haunting when I drive through it because it's this very idyllic little hamlet. You've probably driven through it a few
I
times.
gave a lecture there once.
I'm trying to remember if I did too. It was years ago if I did.
It's a sweet little place.
It is a very sweet little place. And the problem is you look at this campus, which is kind of sprawling considering it's not a very big school, and you
Mhm.
go, what do you do with it now?
Mhm.
Right? And you can't turn it into a school of chiropractic medicine because we don't need another one of those either.
Mhm.
You can't turn it into a low income housing because there's no demand for it out in the middle of nowhere. I find it haunting. I find it kind of
Yeah.
when I see Linda's Diner boarded up along Route 20 or something, it haunts me. I go, that's not just a boarded up diner. Those are broken dreams in that diner. Someone thought they made it. They opened their own diner, and there it is with plywood covering the windows. It bothers me watching that.
Well, it's one thing when you see that stuff in America and all the stuff that we've built in the last 80 years since the Second World War, gets abandoned. It's another thing to go uh, to Italy and see the adaptive reuse of buildings that have been there for, 700 years.
Right, right.
So,
Ours are not going to make that.
well, it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that during this period when we were the richest that any culture has ever been, that we built the shittiest buildings. And, we did it because of the diminishing returns of technology. You get all these modular systems for building stuff, and that allows you to sort of make it as inexpensive as possible in every way. And you end up with the diminishing return being that none of it lasts. That's
That's an interesting point you make. So when Italy was rolling in dough, they built phenomenal things. And when
well,
we were rolling in dough, we built chintzy things.
yeah,
Why is that?
well,
Why did we do that?
for one thing, they didn't have the kind of technology that
To build
we do.
chintzy. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
they didn't have steel I-beams and sheetrock and plastic windows that you pop in and all that stuff. They had everything that they had to do had to come from materials found in nature, one way or another, and had to be assembled carefully by humans. And they expected it to last because it took so much energy and money and care to erect these buildings that it would have been obscene for them to, last only 50 years the way our stuff does. But
So that gets at something I've written about, and that is the idea of creative destruction being too rapid.
uh,
You flat out cannot afford to go through too many generations per unit time.
yeah,
You really have to amortize the generation that you've built and are using before you then tear it down and build the next one, or it's tremendously inefficient. So I think, for example, that if you go too fast, you're always, it depends on a credit-based money system to go that fast. That's what it
yeah,
depends on.
yeah. And over investments in complexity, I think,
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
John or Joseph Tainter put it. You
That was a
know,
great book, by the way. His book is really
oh
good.
yeah,
What's that? Collapse of Complex Societies, I think that was.
that's the title. He's an
That's a good book.
anthropologist
That's a
from
good
Utah
book.
State University. I don't know. I'm quite sure he's retired. I met him once. Actually, I met him in Syracuse, as it happens, at a conference.
I emailed him once just
Yeah.
to reach out. Um,
Dave,
by the
share.
way,
But I will.
I'm listening to Malcolm Gladwell, who gets shit on by his community, but I find his books entertaining.
Yeah, he's a good writer, but he sort of got sucked into the whole Jacobin reign of woke terror bullshit, didn't he?
Well, his most recent book, the Revenge of the Tipping Point, hits some pretty interestingly timely topics,
Uh-huh.
including some of that stuff. And so
What did he
it's
say about it?
well, he talks about DEI, and he comes at it from a sort of a pro DEI view, in which he points out that there's a critical mass that you have to attain. And there's like some fairly magic numbers of, like, if you have a committee or an organization or something, if you have an underrepresented group who are outliers, they don't become non-outliers until you get to about 25%. And he says that there's kind of magic numbers that keep just reappearing, sort of like Fibonacci numbers or something, right?
Yeah, the
But
Pareto
then
distribution.
yeah, something where you go, well, I don't know why that number would keep reappearing, but it does, and
Hmm.
and then he makes an interesting argument, though. He talks about a school where they had a suicide pandemic, and he makes the argument that the school was this hyper achieving group of students with affluent parents, and everything was, every kid was special by some national metric. But he said it was a monoculture, and this suicide started, and they didn't have this sort of social diversity for the thing to burn itself out, and it kind of ripped through the school. And he said schools with more cliques, more different groups, provided a kind of a stability that a monoculture does not provide. And it was kind
Hmm.
of an interesting argument that he made. And so I took from it, if you're going to blend, if you're going to do sort of a DEI thing, don't turn it into a smoothie, right? So don't try to homogenize it. That's not diversity. That's not.
Yeah, but the DEI people took it so far in the other
Oh my God,
direction
yes. Oh
that,
my God, yes.
we ended up by the year 2020 with a new movement to resegregate dormitories by race. This
Right.
after all the civil rights struggles of the 1960s, all of a sudden they wanted to bring segregation back, and it just seemed insane.
I saw maybe one of Scott Adams' cartoons or something many years ago, probably a dozen years ago, where there's a where they showed the protests of the past and they show the present, and there's this guy, this riot cop talking to the protester, and he says, okay, we're going to be protesting here and there, but he says, so we've given you your own dorms, we've given you your own dining room, what do you want? And the guy says, we want our own drinking fountains.
Yeah. Yeah, black only, right?
Yeah, black only drinking fountains. And so but I also view that not as just the left going haywire, but there's something just profoundly astroturfish about it all. I really believe that we have enemies of the American dream who really want us to kill ourselves.
Well, I think that we've learned a lot about it in the last month, and the way I see it, a great deal of that astroturfing, fake, phony social dynamic came out of the money distribution scheme, out of things like
USAID.
USAID and
Yeah.
all of this immense network of NGOs that were very cleverly constructed to feed back into the Democratic Party, so that it became the whole network, this whole matrix became both an employment service for young people coming out of college who otherwise would have had a hard time finding positions, or would have had to start out at a really low entry level to get anywhere. So it was an employment service, and then it was also a kickback service to the officials who ran the Democratic Party, as well as the politicians at the highest level who were, the the, uh, uh, the, the poster children for the representatives, the face of the Democratic Party. So you have the whole, Congress getting paid off one way or another through campaign contributions or other things. You have all these kids being hired into the NGOs in all these staff positions, and many, many of them getting paid really good salaries, six-figure salaries, so they could live in the Beltway, and they could afford to get an apartment of their own, even if they're paying, $3,000 a month for a studio apartment. And they were, really enjoying the luxury of that. And these NGO groups were used to do things like, get the troops out to participate in the riots and support Antifa and BLM and every other cockamamie org and scheme that the Democratic Party had. And now it's all been, they've begun the systematic disassembly of it all. And the Democratic Party is screaming as it sinks into oblivion because it's lost its ability to function.
Doesn't
Well,
it
my
make
wife
you?
called me this morning. My wife called me this morning to complain about what they're doing to science. And I said to her, I said, look, I understand your concern, but we don't actually know what they're doing to science, right? We don't really understand what's happening yet, because what we're seeing, I told her my bigger concern is not that they would do a lot and damage a lot, but rather that they would actually end up not doing anything. That's
Well,
a
who are
much greater.
they?
Well,
Who are
that's
they?
well. So, for example, here's the story that hits academia and has academics really on its heels, is the idea that there's this overhead rate on a grant, and that when, let's say, I get $1 million out of NIH adds another 62% on top of that for infrastructure and overhead and things like that. And it sounds like a grift, but I can give you various reasons why it's not. So, for example, the chemistry building is a former chair once did this probably 30, 40 years ago. He did the math. He said, look, our chemistry research facility, which is quite large, is 2/3 research, 1/3 teaching. Now, research is teaching, so it gets a little vague there, but he says it's about 2/3 of the facility's research. He said if you take the entire overhead that chemists bring into the university, it doesn't pay for the gas and electric for the research component of the building. And one of the reasons it's so expensive is that we actually shove the air from this building out through the hoods every 2 minutes or something. And so try to live in a house where you're flushing your house free of air conditioned air and heated air in the winter every 2 minutes, and tell me how your utility bill's looking, right? So we're not a cash cow. We're a cash cow teaching wise. We have a lot of chem students. So the idea that 62% is this grift. To run a research operation, you have all this infrastructure that you need to support. The principal investigator, the grant money I run, is to run the research and to pay for the graduate students and things like that. So it doesn't look like a grift from my perspective, if society has decided that paying for research and training PhDs, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what I will tell you is that something big has occurred concurrently, and that is that twice I fought labor unionization efforts to unionize our grad students, and I don't want to go into why, but it's a bad idea for that group. Even if you like unions, even if you like plumbers unions and auto workers unions, grad students is a lousy union group because it's a very heterogeneous group. And so I fought it and I won, but then they came back and I had gotten my ass kicked and stuff, so I couldn't do anything, and we got destroyed. And so there's a union. It is the electrical and pipe fitters union, to give you an idea of the absurdity. But what it looks like it's headed for, based on my information that I can see, and I'm not alone. This is not Dave being hyperbolic now. This is a real pall over my colleagues too. Is that it looks like we're heading for a world in which the grad students are paid handsomely to go to grad school. Now, when I went to Columbia and they gave me enough money to get an apartment and eat and not go into debt, that was amazing to me. That was truly amazing. And get a PhD and therefore get a better job. That's only in America sort of thinking. And I always thought it was phenomenal. The grad students, the union's asking for Ithaca grad students to be paid $65,000 a year. That's a healthy income for a kid who's getting a PhD, and their tuition's being paid and their health care is being covered, right? That's a lot of money. And the problem is I think we're heading for a 40-hour work week. So, I got through grad school fairly quickly, and one of the reasons is because I busted my balls. I mean, I worked every waking hour. And that's kind of American ingenuity, right? That's kind of one of the things that's driven us, is that the Americans were willing to grind it out in ways that Europeans were not. And that's all going to go the way of the dodo bird, I think.
You can see what the blowback from that is going to be.
Oh yeah,
pretty easily. And one of the things it will result in is what Peter Turchin calls elite overproduction. And we already have too much of that.
Oh, we have a big time. You know how many tenured track and tenured English faculty we have at Cornell? You're not going to believe this. 48. That is a extraordinary number, given that A, journalism's gone, B, it's not clear how books are going to do, C, there's only so much Chaucer you can study, right? Yeah. And D, Chat GPT and stuff. I used to say, look, everything you see it's written has to be written by someone, so we need literate people, and therefore maybe English is it. That just got whacked.
Yeah, they're looking pretty grim out there for that.
Grim, very grim. In fact, the entire art squad, the humanists, I think are at great risk.
Does it make you wonder with all this, though? And I come back to my conversation with Matt Smith in regards to where this whole digital system is going. But that all this is being released now intentionally for the masses to see, like, okay, we can't fix this. All this fraud, all this corruption with the NGO, USAID, where academia is at now, and to set maybe
au contraire. I think one of the messages that I'm seeing is that we can fix a lot of it, just by stopping it.
Right.
And that's exactly what's going on. So no, it's not true that the lesson from what's happened in the last month is that it's not fixable. It's awful. There's a lot of it, and we have a system that's badly out of whack and that needs to be corrected, but it seems to be going through a process of correction that for the moment we can't see the end of it.
Provided we're actually making the real progress that we claim to be making. So we're seeing a lot of headlines.
Yeah.
And there's a couple things I'm looking for beyond that. First of all, they started making progress, and all of a sudden they start talking about giving everyone $5,000, and the math was all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And they should have known the math was all wrong, because it came to something like $1 trillion. I go, look, you can't. They start talking about paying off the debt. And I go, you got a $1.8 trillion deficit you got to burn through to get to paying off debt. They talk about a sovereign wealth fund. I go, what, are you going to put it on your credit card? I mean, they're saying things that are absurd. And there's a consequence.
Dave, let me the sovereign wealth fund here for a second, because they're talking about that where Jim, I was going to say, Jim, if you want to mute your mic. But the sovereign wealth fund, Howard Lutnick was talking about that in an interview last year, where he was saying, oh, we could put Anwar in there, and we could put TikTok, and like, as I've thought about it, my conversation with Matt's a couple weeks old now. Wouldn't they could just put all this stuff into the sovereign wealth fund and be like, oh, it's worth $10 billion. I'm being,
what's TikTok
sarcastic.
Worth?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So, you say, oh, TikTok, it's worth $20 billion. And again, I'm screwing around for the sake of this conversation, but I feel like that we're right back to where we were. We're just lying on the numbers to make them look more valuable than what they are.
And what is TikTok going to be anyway? it appears that you have a choice. You can do it the American way, which is to have a bunch of middle school girls showing their boobs to each other and their boyfriends.
So don't put that down, Jim.
Or
Go.
you can do it the way the Chinese do it and do like music theory instruction over TikTok. But either way, I don't see that as being any kind of a world-beating business.
No.
Well, same with Anwar, right? When I had Chris Martenson on, we were talking about that, and because Howard Lucken specifically said Anwar and all this oil that's been untapped. Well, Chris Martenson made it a point to say, hey, you can't. It's not like you can drill year round in the Arctic. Second of all, how long is it going to take you to build the infrastructure for that?
Yeah, 10 years.
I would
So,
love to see somehow a real, even, two six-pack drunken discussion between Doomberg and Chris. Because Doomberg has this view that we really are awash in oil, the peak oil theory, which I'm sure we read exactly the same books, Jim, right? All the
sure.
Matt Simmons books, all the who is the Hubbard's Peak books, and
Yeah.
oh my God, I read probably a dozen books to get to the peak oil thesis, and I still, whether it's due to brainwash, whatever, or listening to you or whatever, I still have this look, it's a finite orb and an infinite growth model, and that just doesn't work. The Albert Bartlett model. But Doomberg talks about oil like it really is just hundreds of years worth of oil.
Well, there are some basic hash marks out there that just tell a different story. One is that we have to drill increasingly in forbidding places
Ridiculous places,
that are
yes.
very, very hard to work, whether it's, the Arctic, really the true Arctic, not the near Arctic,
Right.
or deep water, where you have to go 5,000 feet through the water in order to drill another 10,000 feet below that.
Right.
And it's so that's one way of understanding it, and related to that is the expense of having to do that, because it's becoming increasingly forbiddingly expensive to extract the oil in these places. And the bottom line of it is that the energy cost of energy, which is the basic equation for how
The
much
ROI, right?
how much energy it takes, which can be translated into money, it takes to get the oil out of the ground. The ratio for that is just going down, down, down. So, it used to be like 100 to 1 back in the 1920s, let's say. And let's say it was, I'm just spitballing here, but let's say it was, 30 to 1 in 1950.
Right.
In East Texas or something like that. You get 30 barrels of oil back for every barrel equivalent that you put into the operation. And now I think it's something like, single digits. It's like, 7 to 1 or 4 to 1 or something like that. And, you've got, for the last 12, 13 years, the American oil industry has been floated on shale oil. And shale
And
oil
debt.
and debt, because shale oil was never really a profitable venture, and they really got it cranked up during the years of zero interest rate, or near zero, ZIRP, whatever you call it. And because of that, a lot of capital got out of things like bonds and went into what was supposed to be more promising shale oil, which turned out to be a broken promise. And a lot of companies went out of business. And now they've been doing it for all these years. They have produced a lot of oil, but without making a lot of profit the way they used to. And now the Permian Basin, which is the last surviving real bonanza that hasn't gone flat or declined, is now beginning what is perceived to be a decline. So we don't have much prospect on land beyond that. And, people talk about the oil shale in Colorado and Utah, which is different than the shale oil. Oil shale is a much cruder form of carbon material. It's basically kerogen, which is a precursor of oil. And in order to, if you mine the kerogen out of the ground, you then have to use a lot of heat and pressure to turn it into oil. So that's an added expense to the energy cost of energy. And the whole picture is not all that promising for continuing the oil bonanza, a whole lot beyond the 21st century and probably, short of the end of the 21st century. So, yeah, I don't agree with Doomberg at all.
Yeah, well, so I side with you. The only reason Doomberg's a smart guy. Anyone else would go right past me, and I'd go, "Yeah, you're full of shit." He's one of the only guys who can make me pause and listen to him and say, what are his arguments? I think he's actually an abiotic oil supporter at this point.
Yeah. And
And
those are the
and
people who think that the Earth has a creamy nougat center of oil.
well, the problem there is it doesn't get around the argument that you've already made, and that is that we're still digging deeper and further away and with a
And
lower
also,
return.
there's a thing called the oil window, which is that, below a certain depth in the Earth, the pressures are so great that it volatilizes oil. So that, it just wouldn't survive down there. It would gasify below. I don't know. I don't remember what it is. I think it's something like, 15, 20,000 feet under the ground.
Do you know of evidence of abiotic oil? Do you know if that's
No, and I think the main bit of evidence against it is that there's no evidence that any of the major oil fields in the world have ever
are
replenished
abiotic,
themselves.
right?
You know,
Well, it could
and,
be abiotic. It's just the replacement rate's much slower than our withdrawal rate, which means therefore it doesn't matter anyways.
yeah, well, yeah, but and also the areas the oil bearing rock does seem to conform to our understanding of where the ancient seabeds were and especially
Right,
where the shallow seabeds were. So that is kind of evidence for it being what we thought it was, which is the decomposition of, microorganisms and plants. Certainly not
The
dinosaurs.
other spooky thing is that we're living in an interglacial period.
Yeah,
And what I think seems pretty clear is if we don't resolve this issue, this interglacial period is going to be the only period in which civilization thrived, period.
could be.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we better be able to bridge the next glacial period. We better have solved the problem to be able to get us over the next hump, which is problematic.
Yeah, and Elon Musk's idea about
That's
saving
crap.
civilization is going to Mars, which I find absurd because
Totally.
we are delicate little organisms, and the Earth is our habitat, and you know, Mars really is not suited to the kind of life that's found on Earth. And
Apparently, you would, if you spend any time there, you would simply die.
well, I
I mean,
think
you.
so. Also, just space travel itself. We're going to find out. I mean, Elon did discuss this on Joe Rogan's show.
I watched that. It was
Yeah,
pretty entertaining, I
about
must admit.
recovering those two unfortunate astronauts who were stuck up there. They went up there for like a 4-day journey and then they got
Hmm.
stuck up there because the failures of
A
Boeing.
3-hour tour.
Yeah. And he said, it's really hard on you being in zero gravity for a long period of time. Your bones start to dissolve because, the distribution of calcium in your bones is determined largely by gravity, by the force of
Right,
gravity.
right.
And if that's not present, then your bone structure starts to suffer, and God knows what it means for other organs. And we'll find out how messed up those people are when they get back. Although
Well, haven't
there
there
have
been
been,
people out there
yeah,
that long?
there
And
have
this
been
is not
people
an
who have been out there a
untested.
long, long time. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, I don't think that Mars is really going to be a solution for anything. And you're right. This might be the window for civilization, this interglacial period.
So I did a Twitter poll once and asked if you could time travel, how far out would you like to see the future? And it's an
That's a
interesting
spooky
question.
question.
Well, it's a spooky question because 10 years out, it's like, well, things would look pretty recognizable. 100 years out, they would be so different, but you'd have a prayer of being comprehensible. And 1,000 years out, you'd get to and you go, I don't even know what I'm looking at now, and
Uh-huh.
hopefully in a good way, right? One of
Hmm.
the arguments for why Star Trek was such a cult favorite is that we survived.
Yeah.
But
That's the argument that
don't
they
you think?
make.
Don't you
Yeah.
think? I mean, if you look back 10 years ago today, 2015, how vastly the world is so different now. So can you only imagine 10 years from in 2035 where we'll be?
Well, it's different culturally, but is it that different? I'm not sure it's that different technologically.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm not either. For example, it amazes me that when I went to college in 1966, that nobody would listen to music from the 1920s, which is 40 years earlier, right?
Right.
But now, the kids in college are still listening to the Eagles and the
It's
Beatles.
it's because it was real music. The
Well,
music nowadays is like, it's like freeze dried music, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's just really bleak,
more
so
diminishing returns of technology too.
but it's
right?
so much easier
Right.
to access it today though than what it was back then, and it's so much, and you can find it so much quicker.
And the
Uh,
quality is so bad, though. I've noticed a lot in recent years that I don't know anybody who's got a decent stereo anymore. That was like the primary acquisition that young
Oh
people
my God,
made
yes,
in
yes, the big speakers, the
yeah.
big speakers in the
If you
corner of
made
your
any
dorm
money at
room.
all in 1971, the first thing that you got was a
Big
decent stereo
speakers.
system.
Yeah.
Now I've got a little Bluetooth thing that's this big that I play everything on, and and the quality of the music just isn't there. I mean, I remember those nights where you put the two speakers on the carpet and you stick your head between them and smoke some dope, and you have a really kind of transporting experience.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, I mean, the other thing is that like if you listen to say the album of Paul McCartney's, and I can't remember what the title of the album was, but my wife explained it to me, and all of a sudden it made sense. He wrote all the songs while he was a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
What else? What do you remember the name of that album? There's one where he talks about
was it when he was with Wings or?
no, 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 he was kind of on his own and he wrote this album.
Hmm.
And the key is if you listen to them, there there's meaning, right? It was created by a human digging. You listen to Bob Dylan, you listen to these guys, you listen to the anti-war songs of the 60s.
Yeah.
They're not hyper produced things that are designed to sell millions. There's some guy digging deep into his soul trying to. I think of here's a song I've been thinking of a lot lately, and that's Eleanor Rigby.
Hmm. Yeah.
And what it does, it describes the isolation of Eleanor Rigby and Father Mackenzie and right darning his socks tonight when there's nobody there. And I think that's what the world looks like to me now, and I can't tell if it's my skull. Meaning, so I watch the world, and it looks like people going through motions to me, just
Well,
kind of putting them.
oddly, the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney, whoever wrote those songs, felt that even for 50 years ago. They felt that because it's an old song. They're not describing the year 2025.
No,
They're
no, not at
describing the year
all, not at all.
1965.
That's right, and but it was also the songs were written by guys who were for which the song had some meaning to them,
Yeah,
and now it's just production. And so
yeah.
look at the Academy Awards. So I didn't watch them. I picked up little clips, but apparently it's just wretched. It just completely, utterly wretched, including the best actor made it to a McCulkin,
Yeah, it was
right? I
Kieran
think it was
Culkin. It was Macaulay's little brother. I didn't even know
right, and
he.
I'm
I
going,
didn't even know he was in a movie.
holy Jesus. So there is a soullessness. And if you listen to the oldies, I just think they have, with the exception of the 50s, where you were singing about me and my babe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Those were the deepest songs in the
Well,
world.
I've written a lot about this in various books, but one of the features of that whole period and the figures in it was that uh, we were able to watch them mature into grown mature, autonomous men,
Right.
mostly men, well, I mean, some women too, but um, that was something that really got to me. Well, I wrote a memoir called Young Man Blues about a year ago or so, and it was about my adolescent struggles. And I I made the point that, listening to Bob Dylan in the period from 1963 to 1966, you saw somebody uh, growing up in public and developing the weirdest kind of mastery of the world that he was in.
Right.
And it impressed me so much because I was unable to do that until much later. Well, he was older than me. Bob's about 8 years older than me. But uh, it was the journey for me at that point was extremely painful, but I was so fascinated by how he went through that. And you can say the same thing about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in their own way. And I don't know. The long playing record was the art form of my generation, and now it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't. The CD version of it doesn't even exist anymore. So
Did you
it's not
guys
an art form anymore that exists.
did you guys watch Rogan with Bill Murray at all?
I
I
watched a
I
big
I heard a
chunk
little
of
of
it.
it.
I watched a chunk of it.
I got tired of him. He he
It
he
was a
se-
little slow.
he he didn't seem very sharp to me.
Yeah, he came out of the gate. I thought was good, but he ran out of steam. Maybe it was just too long for him. But
Uh-huh.
he was talking about. I thought what I thought was interesting about it was Bob Woodward's book about Belushi,
Oh yeah.
and and they put a clip on it on YouTube. But he was saying because he was a big anti-Nixon guy, Bill Murray was, and he said as soon as I read the first 5 pages of that book, he's like they set Nixon up.
I heard that
Hmm.
part. And actually, the guy who first brought that to my attention was Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
And
Me
and
too.
and if you actually look at the Watergate story, every last one of the players was a deep stater, right? There was just nothing. And the idea that guys got busted breaking into the Democratic headquarters just doesn't even make sense, right?
Yeah, and Deep Throat himself was one of the
And and
deepest deep
and
staters there
Bob
was.
Bob Woodward was a Navy intelligence and had no history and
As
so
a
that
journalist, no history as a
as a
journalist.
journalist, yeah, he was a deep stater.
He had plenty of
Um,
history.
I really am getting increasingly concerned that there's no way to understand the world that we live in. So let me swing it back to something because there's something I just don't understand. The gold story.
Yeah.
What is going on with the gold
So
story?
so let me can
Now,
I
I own a fuck ton of gold. I mean, I own a fuck ton of
where's it
gold, but
at,
I
Dave?
don't.
Where's it at in case we need to.
It's got to be near
Oh. No,
3,000.
I
It's
said
got to
where's
be.
it
Yeah.
at? I said where's your gold at in case Jim and
Oh,
I
it's
want
I. Oh yeah.
to.
Yeah. You get your head blown off. It's secure. Put it that way. It's secure both from low lifes and from the state, in my opinion. I think I have it. I think I have both covered, but it was a non-trivial task.
Let me share two things with you while you're doing that and get both your thoughts on the gold. One, Martin Armstrong was talking about how, and this segues into Europe, that all this gold is leaving Europe because they are, it appears that they are heading towards war with Russia or escalating this. So that's why the gold is leaving Europe and coming to the United States. One thing. Two, is it coming back to, is it being repatriated back to the United States? What we talked about earlier with the sovereign wealth fund and possibly moving into some new type of currency or new financial system. So two things.
Well, we know that gold has some kind of fundamental value in the scheme of human things. Um, but the way that it is manipulated and used within the financial system is very, very shady. And among other things, the whole ownership question of who actually owns the gold, uh, despite where it happens to be sitting at any given moment, is a very sketchy question because it gets leased out, which I don't understand at all. I don't understand how you lease out gold. It doesn't just, I'm sorry, It just doesn't make any sense to me. And the various contracts on it get rehypothecated, which is kind of a bullshit term for something that resembles a shell game. And
Yeah.
there's just so much, to put it bluntly, there's just so much fuckery associated with gold that it's very hard to see how the whole thing fits in with its fundamental value as the original money and the basis of other monies. You know, if it's true that it has that characteristic, then it's a very good thing to have it. But if its role today is just very dubious. So I don't know. I guess I haven't answered your question.
Well,
What
I have the sense that it has more importance than they want us to believe it has. Let's start with
I'd
that.
agree with that. Yeah, because
And
of that
so, so,
fundamental
so,
value.
and one of these, we don't want the populace to actually go to gold, and therefore, I think they set up GLD to draw demand away from the metal itself, for
Hmm.
example. I read the GLD perspective when it first showed up, and it was garbage, in my opinion.
Hmm.
It had a could be here, could be there, could be anywhere, don't worry about it feel to it. And so if you know the system's going to collapse, let's go with that hypothetical. Then gold starts looking profoundly important. It used to be kind of an inflation hedge with wild swings, right? It drives me nuts when guys say gold's not going up or down, the U.S. dollar's going, moving, and I go, excuse me, that's bullshit. And the way you know it's bullshit is I owned gold when it went from 1900 down to 1,000. I owned it going up to 1900 too, but I like the downward trek as a better example.
Hmm.
As gold went from 1900 to 1,000, which the claim therefore is that the dollar just got stronger and stronger and stronger against a fixed benchmark. Gold that the dollar didn't buy more groceries, didn't buy more house, didn't buy more land, didn't buy more anything. So to the extent that gold's a fix, everything in the world moved relative to gold, which makes that a nonsensical argument. That makes
Yeah.
so gold is still a speculative asset until someone puts an anchor on it and says, here's a currency and it's redeemable in gold. And then all of a sudden, now you've got a currency that somehow is tied to gold again.
Yeah.
Now, the BRICS could really whack things out. I've heard rumors of China going up to 80,000 tons, 80,000 tons. Now, those are preposterously large numbers compared to the standard. Some say China has 2,000. I'm guessing that's preposterous on the other end.
Hmm. And I
It's
guess the
quite possible the
benchmark,
BRICS are teeing us up. I
and the
mean,
benchmark in the USA is what, 8,000 tons or something like that?
8,000, 8,100. I've seen 87. I never can keep track. Now, you know that's a bullshit story because you got the smartest guy in the world talking about taking a camera into Fort Knox with a film crew. And that's like saying, there's not much oil. Let's take a camera and go film. Let's go film the oil patch in Texas, right? It's about that absurd. It would take a team, a monstrous team of accountants to go into Fort Knox and audit what's in Fort Knox. I
And
don't have any doubt.
you'd have to bring some essayists too.
That's right. That's right. And then after a very long time, you'd come out and you'd say, okay, here's how much real gold is there, and here's who owns it. And that would be no small feat, especially if the goal is to hide who owns it. Now, someone like Rickard says, yeah, well, it might be owned by other countries, but they're not getting it back.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of, possessions nine-tenths the law argument. But people talk about revaluing gold like it's some sort of profitable venture for the United States. That's the absurdity that I can't get my brain around.
You mean
Re-
revaluing gold
revaluing gold
to
and
like
somehow
a
to
hundred
pay off our
thousand an
debt,
ounce or something?
to pay off our debts. And I
Oh,
go, I don't know how that would work. I have not been able to construct a mechanism
I
by
guess
which that solves any problem.
the main thing that I see is that gold's value really only pops in the consciousness of the system when everything else is in turmoil.
Right.
And when you discover that all of the instruments that represent wealth and capital are just churning in an abyss of a chaotic abyss of values that can't be established. And then all of a sudden you have this one thing whose value you can establish. And what it probably comes down to is the age-old idea that, an ounce of gold will buy you a decent suit of clothing. Whether you're a
Well,
Roman
the one I like
aristocrat
better
or,
is the month of manual labor, which is
yeah,
a
there
more
you go.
demonstrable. So apparently in Roman times, it bought you a month of manual labor, and you say that hasn't changed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I got an unskilled labor, and then you say, well, what are they paid now? And the answer is about a month, about an ounce of gold per month.
yeah.
And so what I've noticed is the grizzled old veterans, the guys who've been doing this for a long time, are now starting to speak in more apocalyptic terms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I used to listen to some guy like Lacey Hunt,
Mm-hmm.
and he would very dryly do some analysis, and he'd say, well, we're going to go through a period of deflation, this and that. And it was like, is your head not lighting on fire? Right there, very a calmness to him. And then I listened to a couple of them, and I've occasionally chatted with them ever so briefly digitally, and I said, you seem more apocalyptic lately. You seem to be more dire in your description, not so much of what's going to happen, but what can't happen now. And he said, yes, you would be correct. And he says, my wife wants me to take a vacation. But then you got guys like Druckenmiller. You got Buffett, who's even come out and kind of dropped back a ways on his Buy American. He's made some statements in public that kind of weren't Buy American flavored statements. You got Jeremy Grantham, who talks about this as the third and the greatest bubble he's witnessed. And meanwhile, you have all these people who somehow think that they're just going to retire on NVIDIA.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a delusion. And what bothers me the most, and Michael, at least you've heard this, is that tops, which we are clearly closer to a top than a bottom, let's put it that way, are usually marked by euphoria. And I'm not picking up the euphoria with the exception of some recent euphoria over Trump. But you also don't build a recovery off of the current foundation. This is a termite-infested foundation.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's where my skepticism comes in because of how rotted these institutions are. But the other thing is too, paralleling with gold is what is this administration's idea of how Bitcoin will fit into all this? Because there's a summit on Friday.
Yeah, it's bewildering to me.
No, it's got me too, because it's being treated as a solution. Now, I have no trouble with, at least in theory, the idea that Bitcoin solves the problem of a stable metric, right? The whole blockchain communication and the stable metric. I see problems with that theory, but it doesn't blow my circuits. The idea that the United States is somehow going to get rich off Bitcoin is total nonsense.
Yeah. To me, it's just math.
It's just math. Yeah. Well, by the way, if the world is denominated in dollars and all of a sudden Max Kaiser owns half the world, there's if all of a sudden it's now denominated in Bitcoin and Michael Saylor and Max Kaiser are gigantic owners of the total world.
And then you have to ask yourself,
for me.
What do they really own? They own X numbers of hours of electric generation that it took to supposedly create the math that is represented by the Bitcoin. But I just don't see how electrically produced math means anything of value.
Well, it's also inflationary in the sense that, so what are the cryptos worth? 3 trillion now? That's
I don't know.
but it's something like that.
Okay.
That's 3 trillion that didn't exist at all. So it would be like if all of a sudden someone dug $3 trillion of gold out of the ground, in a couple of years. You're not wealthier. You've changed your metric. You've to create wealth, you really have to, I think if you look at what the book value of the world now, you can come up with various estimates of what it's worth. You look at the book value of the world at the time of Christ, and you can kind of come up with estimates in modern day dollars what the world was worth. And it gets a little sketchy because real estate, who knows, it was pretty available at the time. But you could add up the buildings and stuff. And if you actually do the compounding, it turns out the wealth of the world has grown at something like 0.1% annualized. And the conclusion that I draw from that is that we create wealth at a pretty much the same rate that we consume it or destroy it. And the only thing that is compounded is knowledge. Mm-hmm. That's compounded exponentially through periods of deadness. But the ability to produce a rocket that you can shoot in space now, bring back and catch with a pair of tweezers and bring down, right? That's a big difference than what was going on in the Middle Ages. Although Michelangelo, did you read his biography, McCullough or Isaacson? I think it was Isaacson. It's a great biography. Da Vinci. Da Vinci. I read Michelangelo's too. Da Vinci figured out how the human heart worked, and they didn't show it to be true until 1972. I mean, that's a pioneering bit of research he did there, right?
Yeah.
But we haven't been compounding wealth. And the way you can tell is that if you stopped putting enthalpy, right, heat into the system, within 25 years, we'd be back to just Earth, right? Everything would just collapse in the foundation, which means we're furiously swimming at full speed and pumping as much oil out of the ground just to keep the order from going to complete disorder.
Yeah. Well, we do know that you either continue that process of growth or you collapse. There is no,
which is a paradoxical impossibility.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So
what seems to have compounded is maybe not the true production of real wealth, but simply the math.
Right.
And
well,
that's
the knowledge.
That's finally what Bitcoin represents, is just math.
Well, but the Bitcoiners at times, they drive me a little nuts when they talk about Bitcoin as energy, and I'm going, now you're getting.
Well, it is in a way, because
it costs energy.
If you have any problem with the electric grid, then Bitcoin is valueless.
Well, there's that, but if we have trouble like that, we're all going to starve to death. So,
well, it would be pretty awful and difficult, but it's still, it doesn't have to completely go away. All it has to do is become problematic or intermittent or not entirely reliable. And then all of a sudden, Bitcoin's another story. Bitcoin seems to me to be an artifact of the assumption that the electric service is completely reliable. And that's been our experience in the last 50 years living in America.
Right.
But it's not necessarily the way the world really works.
Yeah, I'm not sure the guys in Gaza are thrilled that they have their wealth in Bitcoin right now. I think, they might be thrilled to the extent they say, if I can get out of here, then I'll have it, which is not a crazy argument, right? The transportability of the Bitcoin is an appeal.
Yeah.
Well, how does a stable coin then? I mean, I don't like the stable coin or meme coins. How does any of that play into all this?
Meme coins are crap.
That's just straight gambling.
That's just straight gambling, and it doesn't even. Yeah, that's straight gambling, and you're playing against the house, and you're going to lose. And I don't think there should be any regulation whatsoever on meme coins, because I think if you're stupid enough to buy meme coins, have a ball. I do not want regulation on meme coins at all.
Yeah.
And the stable coins?
Well, the stable coins, aren't they the sort of the on ramps and off ramps, right? Those are the transitional coins between Bitcoin and dollars.
Yeah, they seem to me to be just an electrical representation of fiat currency.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I think so. I have a lot of theories about Bitcoin. No one seems to debate the fact that three NSA guys wrote the first paper on crypto. I've not heard anyone refute that. And so right away your spidey sense should say, I'm not comfortable with that origin story, right?
Is that
Um,
before or after supposedly Satoshi invents Bitcoin?
that's before supposedly.
Okay.
And um, of the many things, if I were going to say invent central bank digital currency, one of the great ways to do it would be to release the idea, let the smartest guys in the world debug it, then say, okay, you guys did a nice job. Now it's like startup companies, right? If you're some biotech startup company, you get this brainchild, you figure out how to use DNA to do something, and you get this. But at some point, the big guns step in and say, okay, we're taking over. We're gonna make it this guy CEO. He's a business guy, and by the way, here's your 3% of the company, which the rest is now ours, right? So you get pushed aside, and I wouldn't be shocked if the crypto world was just a very large version of that, where at some point the banking system is going to say thank you for your diligent perfection of digital banking. Have a nice day. Now, I think some of these guys are going to end up very rich. I very much doubt that Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert are ever going to have trouble paying off their credit card, right? You know,
I used to know them too.
well,
I
I've done a
was,
bunch of podcasts with them.
yeah, I was really surprised that their lives took the turn that it did.
Well, they got on it so early. I
Yeah,
mean, I just saw a video the other day of Stacy humping Bitcoin at 30 cents.
yeah.
And so there's no way they're not wealthy. Last podcast I did with them, I said, I'm going to guess you have no trouble paying your utility bills every month, Stacy. And
Yeah.
she kind of blew it off. She didn't bite. She just kind of ignored the comment. And but Sailor's a different story.
And by the way, she's a lovely person.
She is a lovely person. Yeah,
Yeah.
she is a lovely person.
Max is a little hard to reach. I think
Yeah,
it's
he's got a shell. He's got a wall. He's got a protective
I think it's
shell.
because he stopped drinking and doing drugs 25 years ago or whenever it was. Really, I went out for drinks with them in Paris in 2010 or so, and because Stacy invited me to go out for a drink with them. They found out from my blog that I was in Paris. And so I met him at their studio on the right bank, and we went to some bistro, and Stacy and I shared a bottle, and Max just sat there very sullenly, kind of. He might have been just looking.
I think Stacy's the civilizing force in that relationship, which
Yeah.
is generally true. I have tons of life maxims. One is that men fix car and women fix men, and I think Stacy fixes Max.
Yeah.
And you ever seen a picture of Stacy's mom?
No.
Smoking hot,
Jeez.
smoking hot. Yes,
Oh, there you
very.
go.
So
Yeah.
so let me shift from this. Let me shift from this because I want to talk about Europe and what the state of it is in regards to last Friday, what occurred with Zelensky storming out of the White House. Now I'm reading today that Trump is apparently in his speech to Congress tonight is going to announce that he signed a deal with Ukraine on the minerals. So maybe this is all for nothing, but I mean, do you guys see the end of the EU, possibly the end of the EU, or possibly the end of NATO by events that occurred on Friday with Zelensky?
Yeah, I do. I see
Hopefully,
I see
hopefully.
the EU being destroying its member nations and putting itself in a position to be just thrown away. And also, there's a lot of chatter out there now that the EU was a creation of the American deep state CIA blob, and that it had kind of nefarious intentions in being set up. So, and it certainly has acted nefariously in the past in the past decade, and it's driving its member nations into neo-medievalism economically, and I don't see it lasting. Now there's also chatter that Trump is going to announce that we're done with NATO in his speech tonight. I'm not sure that that's going to happen. And there's
But you wouldn't be
additional.
flabbergasted, though. You
I wouldn't be
wouldn't be
flabbergasted, no.
flabbergasted.
The
No.
only catch is that there's also chatter that it would require an act of Congress because it was a treaty that was ratified by Congress, and he can't just
Interesting.
unilaterally declare that America is not in it anymore. But the one thing that we've seen from the aftermath of the Zelensky Oval Office meeting is that Europe has gone crazier than ever.
I think that's right. I
Yeah.
think that's correct.
Yeah, what are you saying?
I think they're bluffing too. I think Europe wants to pull the United States back in, and they're trying to say we're going to do it. God damn it! And we would like your help. And I don't think Europe can do it. I don't think they should do it. I think that it's a total straw man argument that Putin's trying to take over the world. I think that's total horseshit.
Yeah, I agree.
Total horseshit. And I listened to a Piers Morgan 5-box discussion where one of the guys was Scott Horton, who's both encyclopedic and lacking in any filter in terms of delivering any sugar coatings on his messages. He really beats the shit out of his opponent with everything he's got. And I'm actually I'm further than Scott Horton.
And what did he say exactly?
Well, he basically says, look, there's nothing that can be done now. Who's going to push Putin back? This is stupid, this discussion. He says, and then he hammered one of the hawks on the panel. And he said, you guys with your spectacles and you do this bullshit. You're going to get us in World War III and blah, blah, blah. And I agree with him. I don't care what happens in Ukraine. With the exception of, I think it would be nice if we stop killing people over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care where the borders are; they've been shifting since the dawn of time.
I look at Ukraine, and I just think this is a place that nobody cared about really for the past 80 years, and all of a sudden we have to care about it. It's clearly within the sphere of influence of Russia and has been for centuries. We have no business over there. The Europeans don't really, their only interest in it is whether it can be a doormat for another invasion of Russia.
Which is insanity.
Their current fantasies about entering this war are completely insane. They don't have armies that amount to anything. They don't have the munitions. They don't have anything they could not conduct war.
I saw a great meme or something where supposedly he's a German guy, and he says, I want to see if I've got this right. You want us to build a big army and attack Russia? He says, I want that on paper. and I'm so the Brits talk about they're going to send troops on the ground in Ukraine. I go, when they come, by the way, I'm missing a Zoom call with an MEP in Britain instead. So with you guys instead of with her. I'll listen to the replay. But when Brits start coming back in body bags, that party's going to end fast.
It's insane. They've got something like, I think I read something today. They have like 30 tanks, and that's all they got that can run. They've got like 3 dozen airplanes, and that's
they got
all
something
they
like
got.
50,000 troops.
No, they've got I think 70,000.
Yeah,
something
but
like that.
But
so does Algeria.
I know. Putin can take out 70,000 troops in a heartbeat. So some guy, one of my favorite guys on Twitter, who I don't want to mention because I don't want to hammer him, but you'll know him, Mike, where I agree with him on everything, but he hates Putin and he totally pro-Ukraine, and he goes by a pseudonym. You know who I'm talking about.
Can't say it on here? What's the difference? Doesn't matter. It's public. It's all public.
Darth, right?
Well, I got to say the second half. I got to say.
And in any event, so at one point he was hammering Trump, and he made some reference.
I love him, by the way. I love his handle. I love his handle too.
I don't take offense to this story, and he actually took it really well. But he said something about Zelensky, staying in Kiev while bombs were dropping on him, and Trump hiding for some reason. And so I said, wait a minute, I'm going to do some homework here. It turns out that since February 22nd, 2022, more people have died from violent deaths in Chicago than in Kiev. And it's clear that Putin said, look, I'm not going to bomb the shit out of Kiev.
Yeah, I think he doesn't want Ukraine to be turned into a basket case ward
Which
of the
it has
state.
now is the
Yeah,
problem.
pretty
It
much.
has.
Pretty much. But, I think that they didn't want that outcome. They didn't want Ukraine to have to be something they'd have to continue paying for indefinitely. They wanted it to be a sovereign nation that could take care of itself with its own economy. And so they didn't try to bust the whole place up. But they ended having to bust quite a bit up, including
because of NATO, because of goddamn NATO.
Yeah.
By the way, the force that Putin moved into Ukraine was about a tenth the size that the force that the Soviets went in Finland with and lost.
Wow.
Preceding the bulk of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Soviets attacked Finland, they came in with 1.5 million.
Wow.
And they didn't win. So if you think Putin thought he was going to occupy Ukraine with 150,000 troops, he just sent a police force in. That's what it was.
Well, and there's a reason he called it a special military operation, and still does.
Right.
So I think that it's going to draw to a close in the next 60 days.
I hope so.
I think Zelensky will be thrown over by his own generals. He's wrecked the place. I think the people hate him. He'd never win another election, and I think his generals realize that he's lost his legitimacy, and they're going to get rid of him.
Will he be able to escape?
Who you just interviewed, Mike? You just interviewed him. What's the old guard? The guy I've known for 20 years. I was listening to his podcast.
Porter Stansberry?
No, the guy I got talked about getting kicked off Twitter. Come on,
Darth?
I've known him.
No, I had Darth on.
Carl
Denninger.
Denninger. Yeah, I've known Denninger sort of reading his stuff for 20, 25 years. And he talked about what a dictator is. And he says, when Lincoln basically helped get us into the Civil War, and in the middle of the war, he got reelected. And it was the public's way of saying, we're going to sign off for more of that. And he says, Zelensky didn't. And he says, that's the difference. Ukraine, their ability to decide to change course was removed by him canceling the election. That's a fundamentally interesting view, is this idea that by getting rid of the election, you take away the ability of the public to decide the path that they want to follow.
How about when he was over here earlier last year in Pennsylvania with Shapiro, and he's autographing the bombs?
I don't trust Shapiro at all.
But
yeah, that was a nasty stunt.
I mean, you're signing bombs that are going to get dropped on people.
I know. The Romans used to do that, by the way.
Let me read something.
The Romans used to autograph the shit they threw over the walls.
Let me read something to you guys and get your thoughts on it. This is Ian Burlingame, who I had on my show last week, and he's actually coming back on tomorrow with Matt Bracken. And he put something on X that, I'd be curious what you guys think of, and it ties into Russia, Ukraine, and the EU. If the pattern holds, they'll drive ethnic hatred against all the immigrants and undesirables, shove them into forced labor death camps, use these to...
Who's they are we talking about? Who's they?
The WEF.
Europeans? The Europeans, okay.
But this would happen in the United States. Use these to rebuild military industrial capacity and to massively rearm. Then they'll move to kill off as many of their sons in war against Russia as they possibly can to both reset their financial and economic systems and to remain in power. This is their way. It isn't like they haven't done this before and not in the so distant past. Plan on Ukraine and EU, perhaps occupied British terrorist attacks here in the United States and the UK, as an all-out campaign to sow chaos, rage, and fear, all to be blamed on Russia, so as to draw us back to a slaughter of war on the European continent.
Well, it does seem to me that the NATO members are trying to draw us into a war with Russia, but I don't see them having any success in doing that with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance in power. So I just don't think that's going to work. I think they're just going to wreck their own nations, and then they will have to deal with the terrible immigrant overflow that they've created for themselves.
I agree. I also think there's just a lot of bluffing. I, I have a little trouble with these elaborate orchestrated resets. I think there are resets coming, but I'm not sure that these models that require these complex scenarios to reset something on purpose, like the gold story being part of some elaborate plot. I think it's just more emergent than that. It just seems like the world is just going to shit. And what we're all sitting around coming up with complex models to explain why it's going to shit.
Yeah, and one of the things about the complex models that I always notice is that they never take into account that the turbulence that's created as a result, the chaos,
changes the model.
It changes the model, and it also changes the legitimacy of the authorities who they imagine are pulling off all these machinations.
Right.
Because they go down, they become Ceausescu very quickly.
Yeah,
all of a sudden the audience starts to boo, and a half an hour later they're taken out to the courtyard and shot.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm very curious to see what's going to happen to Keir Starmer.
Did you see that? Did you see the Keir Starmer Jimmy Savile photo that went through Twitter?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, but Starmer seems to be kind of a cartoon character out of an Orwellian comic book. If you were going to draw an Orwellian tyrant, an Orwellian villain, it would be Keir Starmer. And I can't. I just see the British public turning on him violently in the very near future.
They're going to elect Tommy Robinson.
Well, maybe Nigel Farage, but not Tommy Robinson.
Someone was hammering Farage, saying he's not what he appears to be. Too. I always worry that I'm misreading the room in a fundamental way. I never know.
I've seen that too. I've seen that.
But I think that's just a natural consequence of if a guy is rising in power, there are going to be counter stories that gin up to discredit him.
I know.
And Tommy Robinson might be, the equivalent of Nigel Farage's Elon.
I thought you were going to say Andrew Tate, Jim.
Oh God,
Andrew Tate. I don't think so.
No, Tate's too far over the
he's
edge.
Too dark.
Yeah, he's really dark.
Tommy Robinson, for all of his, the strange qualities of what he comes from, he has heroic qualities too. Truly,
he does. He does.
Archetypal heroic qualities.
Right, fearless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I don't know. In a year, we'll know. I worry that we're misreading Trump. I kind of like the model of Trump as this guy who's just going in with just dropping bombs and chainsaws and gripping it and ripping it. And if it turns out that it's way more sophisticated, I think at some level I will be despondent.
What is more sophisticated in what way?
I kind of like the model of Trump getting in there and saying, look, we just got to shred this government and start over. And if it turns out that the whole Trump movement is way more orchestrated than that, at some level, it's got this feeling of same boss, same as the old boss.
Yeah, not for me. To me, it has qualities that are authentically emergent.
That's okay. I'm okay with that model. That's what I mean by him just going in there and start throwing grenades and
Hmm.
and
You
he's
know?
got to keep the momentum going,
Hmm.
right?
Well,
That's
I
going to be
think
a
part of
trick.
that has to do with the fuckery that surrounds a lot of the FBI stuff and Department of Justice stuff. And one of the things that is irritating a lot of people currently is the fact that, we've got a new Attorney General and a new Director of the FBI, and none of the outstanding scandals has really been addressed at all. The
So here's
January 6th
here's
thing
here's
or the Epstein or
I would
Russiagate.
counter that if they had not promised to do it immediately. If they
Yeah.
had said, "Look, we're going to go in, and this is going to be a work in progress, so patiently wait, we're going to get there." But I don't think. Let's say Epstein's got all these famous goddamn people really incriminated. I don't think you necessarily just blow it out into the public view in one fell swoop.
No, maybe not. And Epstein, I think, is for me personally, I think Epstein is less important than, despite Whitney
Unless
Webb.
there's more than we can imagine.
Yeah, unless there's, yeah.
But
I mean,
how
like videos of, satanic rituals involving celebrities,
how do
political
you
celebrities.
trust it at this point, though? I mean, they've had it for so long; it's been scrubbed. So whatever they do end up releasing, I was having the conversation, talking about how the Diddy tapes are more relevant because it's so new. It's so much.
Well, they're tapes. I mean, they're video evidence, but it's hard to understand how all those videos that they found in Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan and on Little St. James Island and out in New Mexico, how none of them have managed to leak out to the public.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
the suspicion is that they were all destroyed almost immediately when they were found. And I find that quite possible. So that, what we might finally get out of Epstein is only 1,000 odd pieces of paper, just more paper.
Well,
And I'm
Bondi
not.
came out and made another bold statement just yesterday saying we've got a truckload now.
Yeah, but a truckload of what? Is it a truckload of
Well,
video evidence, or is it just a
I
truckload
don't
of
know.
depositions and
It
stuff like that?
well,
it could be in theory it could be 3 tractor trailer loads to cover
Yeah.
all the stuff, right? It really could be that big
well, but
Yeah.
if
but
it
but
covered all the stuff.
here's the other thing, though, and I don't remember who was writing about this on X, but that she was the attorney general in Florida. I mean, that's where Epstein lived. So where was the action then in regards to any of this?
Well, I think the movement had not reached a tipping point.
Yeah. And also the whole thing had been interrupted by the federal court system in Florida had taken over that investigation and then queered it, no pun intended.
Totally.
But what I'm really concerned about or keeping my eye on is what happens in the FBI, especially. And I think the wild card right now is Mr. Dan Bongino, and that
I think that's right.
he comes on board on March 17th. The thing about Dan Bongino is that, he has documented all of the money trails and all of the personalities involved in the interconnected scandals of the last 8 years. And then the issue is how do they make cases and how do they bring cases against the people who really need to have cases brought against them, like Merrick Garland and John Brennan and Comey and Strzok, etc.
And how is that, by the way, going to be done consistent with the public's demand for total transparency, which can fuck up a case?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe you can explain that a little. I'm not sure that would be a terrible issue because if you have a really professionalized set of attorneys following proper procedure, without leaks.
But that's my point is the public wants leaks.
Well, I think the public will be satisfied if they see motion in a case.
Progress.
Yeah, and especially if it happens in a fair and orderly manner. I think that's a very important part of this is that
Right.
unlike the weaponization of the Merrick Garland and Biden years, these prosecutions will be unassailably fair.
So one of the books about the 0809 crisis was written by, and I can't remember the authors because my brain's too addled, but it looked at the legal side of the 0809 crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And what it focused on was the fact that there were some serious investigations. And what would happen is they'd build this beautiful case against someone, and then it would go to an appeals court. The appeals court would spend 2 hours looking at it and then throw it out.
Well, was that because they were bad cases or bad courts?
Bad courts, in my opinion. Bad
and that's
courts.
one of the reasons that when they do this, they're going to either have to clean out the D.C. district, federal district, and get, impeach judges and get new ones, or they're going to have to try these cases in other federal districts.
Right.
And it's a little problematical because, under the law, you have to try the case in the federal district where the crime was committed. And that's obviously going to be a problem. But I think it's one they could well anticipate in advance and get around. There are going to be federal judges.
Is Bondi up to this? Is Bondi up to this?
I think she is, despite the fact that she looks like she's 14 at age 60.
Which is amazing.
It is amazing. I can't
between her and Megyn Kelly, and I have it for Dana Perino. They're this. When I was young, I thought the hot chicks are 22, and I'm looking at the 40-year-olds going, man, they're
55 and 60-year-olds.
I know.
Is Megyn Kelly 55?
Yeah, she's up there. Yeah,
she's an old lady. She doesn't need to use birth control anymore, probably, and she sure looks like she should have to.
Yeah, well, yeah, she looks nubile.
She's 54.
Anyway,
she's 54.
Anyways, aside from Pam Bondi's physical appearance, she seems to me to be superbly competent and confident. I did think she got blindsided and bird-dogged by this latest operation, or the previous operation, with the giving the binders to the journalists.
But she said they were on her desk.
Well, she did, yeah.
And so she really blew it badly.
Yeah.
She didn't say, look, they're about to deliver them, and then say they didn't deliver shit. She said they're on my desk.
Well, and maybe we'll find out what she meant by that.
You and I could have looked at what they released and said, no, Pam. It would have taken us 1 hour to figure out that was going to blow up in her face.
Yeah, it was obviously stuff that has been in the public domain for years.
Now, there are theories out there that was actually a planned disaster to tee up phase 2.
Which is cleaning out the Southern District of New York.
Now we have to do it, yes. And it could be that was a classic Trump move.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Matt Gaetz is supposedly going to be put in charge of something that makes it look like his failure to get confirmed with no fight had nothing to do with what was intended.
Yeah, they're chatting about him, putting him in charge of prosecutions.
That's right. And all of a sudden you go, Matt Gaetz, he could be a pain in the ass, right? That's exactly right.
So between, Bongino and Patel and Bondi and maybe Matt Gaetz, it seems to me we're going to see a lot of action. And, especially around the J6 stuff, which ought to be fairly easy to figure out.
Now,
including the pipe bomber.
Patel's been dead quiet, right?
He has been dead quiet. Yep. For 10 days.
And to me, that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he was out there, like when Elon talks about bringing the film crew into Fort Knox, I go, now you're bullshitting us. I don't want Patel to be out there bullshitting us.
Mm-hmm.
So
and also, I think
Patel would say to the top 10 guys in the FBI, here's the deal, guys. You're working with me or you're fired. And you're going to go get this. You're going to get this. You're going to get this. You're going to get this. And you're going to bring it to me. And you got X days to do it. And if you don't do it, you're gone. You're out of here.
Yeah. And I think the 10 days of silence is partly,
something's happening.
It's partly a test to see who's leaking.
Right. One of the tricks they do is they actually give everyone slightly modified information. And then when the leak comes out, they go, oh, by the way, that person who was also incriminated, only you had that knowledge.
You only had that detail. You had that.
That's right. It's a little like a hidden barcode.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that'll be interesting. But my concern is that the FBI is so fucked up that there's no FBI to fix the FBI.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that there's some left, but they're going to have to really clean out a lot of people. And they know who a lot of the bad guys are anyway, the worst guys.
Right.
And they'll hire some new guys.
Peter Strzok.
Well, he's not in there anymore. He's
no, but you got to figure he's shitting in his pants right now, right?
I do.
You got to figure between the Epstein files and all this other stuff, you got to figure there's some people who are climbing the walls.
And they went to such exorbitant pains to get rid of Trump.
So there's some
and they failed
here.
So spectacularly. And now there he is again, on their ass.
This is like trying to whack Mohammed bin Salman and failing to pull off the whack, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be pretty when he finally decides it's time to deal with you.
Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of these guys are sweating it out badly. And, if they don't go to jail, they're going to lose all their money paying for their legal expenses.
Or leave the country.
Yeah. And you haven't heard much from them either in the last 2-3 weeks, have you?
I'm not even sure who the quietest people are, either the really good ones or the really bad ones.
You don't hear from Obama. Have you heard anything from Obama lately?
Not in a while. No.
Well, I got to tell you, he's probably all over the Diddy tapes. Let's start with that.
I can't imagine on those tapes who's involved in all that. That's why, to me, that's more interesting.
Found evidence of the rabbit hole going deep enough. And
I don't quite understand.
You guys both know that I will go down a rabbit hole as far as I can, and I have not found. There's pictures of LeBron in a dress, for example.
Yeah, that's out there
Supposedly.
Right. Yeah, that's the problem. But it's not being refuted either, and so I think there's people who are going to get hurt. But I have not seen evidence beyond just sort of guilt by proximity of important people. It still looks like it's contained amongst Hollywood gay rapper bad guy community.
I don't understand what's taking them so long to make a case and bring a case to a grand jury and proceed
on
with
him.
It. Yeah, what's taking so long?
Maybe he's spilling his guts right now, right?
Well, how long would that take?
I don't know.
Months and months and months of depositions? I don't think so.
But have you heard about things like the connection between various people's houses and the tunnels leading to Hefner's mansion and shit? And I don't know what to make of that shit. I
tend to not believe it, but who knows?
Until you see it.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like a fairy tale.
I know, and I'm trying to figure out if I want it to be true or not.
And I can't shake the memory of the McMartin daycare scandal from the 1980s.
I bet you have it wrong. Tell me what your view of it is.
That it was a hysterical fabrication.
I don't believe that to be true.
Okay.
By
the way, it's not a hard and fast belief. That's just my spidey sense.
Well, so they've actually, guys have done some serious probing and found the tunnels underneath the McMartin site and stuff.
I don't know the story.
So the McMartin daycare was one of the first cases of a pedophile ring that sort of hit the press. And supposedly this daycare facility was molesting the shit out of kids. And you go, how did this whole family, a bunch of pedophiles, and how did it stay quiet, right? There was a lot of things that were not explainable. And so I didn't buy it at the time. Something made no sense. And then later, the kids came out and said, I made it up. and I feel guilty, and then it turned into, they call it satanic panic. And the claim is that this is the risk, and that you can actually think there's something horrible going on when there's not. And it turns out to be it's sort of like the analog of using FDR as an excuse to grow government. Every time you want to grow it, you invoke FDR. Every time you want to shoot down something like this, you invoke satanic panic. And it turns out that I think the McMartin case was real. And I think the evidence is actually pretty good. And the problem is that the kids, to the extent that they were first of all, I used to think pervs were soloists, and now I realize, no, it's the networks that protect them, period. And so the McMartin daycare case makes sense as a network, which the part I couldn't understand at all. The satanic component was not imaginable to me, but it's become clear to me that I don't know when they're true or not, but they exist. They do exist.
Yeah, that's the part I have so much trouble with, because it just seems
it's so sick.
Satanism seems both sick and childish to me.
Well, I've spoken with so many people who've been digging into this, and it supposedly is the fastest growing religion in the world right now, supposedly. Now, it could be growing off a small base, but I think it's out there. It's not imaginable that people would do what they do, right? It just doesn't make sense. But I think the evidence is very strong that there are cases where families feed their kids into these networks, and they do these bizarre things, and I think that it is fucked up, and I think it does happen. So then that part of the McMartin story becomes, at least stays on the table. The kids who later on regretted the whole thing, it turns out that the things that the kids were claiming were pretty outlandishly adult, and
they wouldn't understand,
that they would not have understood. And so I think that if you dig into the McMartin case, provided you don't just go to Google, right? You want to find a case like this, you go to Yandex. And the guy to talk to would be probably Nick Bryant, who if he has a strong opinion, it's well founded. He's very good at that stuff. So I suspect the McMartin case was real, and that they, after the fact, undermined it. And by the way, like the Franklin scandal, all the victims of the Franklin scandal got flipped and said I made it all up too.
Is that the Boys Town thing?
That's the Boys Town thing. And that's clear. That was clearly the authorities coming in and stepping on those bastards like there was no tomorrow. So if you are a victim and you step out of the shadows, the FBI is not going to be your friend. Ever. The FBI shuts them all down. There's the famous Finder scandal where the same shit was showing up in like 3 or 4 different cities, and then it just got shut down completely. And so I know this shit's true. I don't know when it's true and when it's not true. So I know these things happen, but if you try to pin me down on any one case, you go, there's a probability behind all these cases. But there are things like that going on, I think. And I think that if I had to bet a paycheck, I'd bet the McMartin case was true.
Yeah, well, let's keep an eye on how fast the Diddy case actually gets developed into a real court case. I mean, we all know that the mills of the gods grind slowly, and it's just an unfortunate fact about the law, but it has taken an awful lot of time. I mean, it's been more than a year, isn't it, that Diddy himself has been sitting in the cooler?
Right, which tells you something's wrong.
Well,
right? Tells you something odd. Now, here's one that keeps haunting me over and over and over. Will Smith whacking Chris Rock, I think, is got a deeper story than what we were told. Chris Rock saw it coming. If you watch that carefully, Chris Rock kind of leaned into it and sort of grimaced, and he knew that smack was coming.
Do you think that it was staged, or that he orchestrated it, or made it
Well,
happen, or what?
I think it was known to be going to happen. But what then becomes mystifying is if you were Chris Rock, let's say Will Smith slipped up, right, and lost his shit. I think the right thing to do in a community like that would be for Chris Rock to say, "We staged it, no problem," and move on, right? One of those. I think you'd step up and back the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I haven't seen anything really seriously on this, but I think it was staged, and I think it was some sort of kind of career suicidal move, and I don't know what the motivation
For
was.
Will Smith or Chris Rock?
For Will Smith. And
Well,
I don't know why.
Hollywood itself is just committing suicide. You know, it looks like an entire generation or two of Hollywood actors are just disappearing. They're just
Right.
Yeah, you've got
they're
this.
just not getting employed, and Hollywood is not able to make movies anymore that anyone wants to see.
Well, someone told me something else, and what would keep you towing the line in Hollywood? Maybe it was my brother who watched a podcast by someone who said he said they were talking about some movie role, and it was going to be either Tom Selleck or someone well known, and it said they went with so and so, someone well known. And it turns out within Hollywood the parts are so interchangeable. Where there's 10 leading men you can go with for any role if you want to. You can't possibly duck the system. Nobody's bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
And so to the extent that there's a role you have to play and stand up and thank the Academy and support Ukraine and support transgenders and right and all these things,
Yeah.
that you can't take the risk because there's 9 guys behind you who want that fucking job.
Well, it's a notoriously insecure profession.
That's right. And you've had some experience with it, as I recall.
Oh, very, very little. I was a drama major, a theater major in college, and
No, but you talked about writing a screenplay and how
oh,
fucked
I've
up
done
it
a lot of
gets.
that. Yeah, a lot of my books were optioned for the movies,
And they
and
butcher it pretty quick, right?
well, none of them got to the movies, but I did write screenplays for some of them, and I got these idiotic quote notes from the producers, and they would ask you to, turn a male character into a female, and can't you change Indiana to Venice?
See, that would
And
drive me
it
crazy.
drove me crazy. Yeah,
Completely crazy. Completely crazy.
I have a hard enough time with book editors, who I consider to be a kind of, unfortunately, I consider them to be vermin, and I don't like my prose to be messed with at all.
Well,
I'm just
part of it's because if you really write it to the point of what you perceive to be perfection, it just does. So I wrote a review article in chemistry. I started it about 4 years ago, and then I finished it about 6 months ago. And I couldn't find a home for it. And it was a little too long for this journal and not quite right for this journal and things like that. It was a personal journey sort of review. And, but I wouldn't budge, right? I could have shortened it and fit it here. And I said, no, I'm not. It turns out just the other day, an opportunity that was perfect knocked. Within 15 minutes, I had it uploaded and off my desk.
Oh, yay.
But I wouldn't compromise at all.
I had an experience with my second or third novel. I hope I haven't told this story before. On
Don't
your
worry, we've
podcast.
forgotten it already. So.
Well, it was just an early jejune novel I wrote about a young college professor, and I'd never taught in a college before, and I hadn't been married, and it was a marriage cracking up story set in a college, and it was called Brain Damage: A Love Story. And the publisher was St. Martin's Press. Anyway, the editors were really incensed at the title. They didn't like the title "Brain Damage: A Love Story." They thought, readers would think I was writing about retards, and that they'd never sell any books. So they really put the they really stepped on my neck about it, and they said, we're not going to give you the rest of the money unless you come up with a new title. So I stalled and stalled, and the book's in production, and so we're getting galley proofs and or something like that, where the line edit, and they said, well, have you got a title? And I said, okay, I'll send you a new title on Monday. And the new title I gave them was Hell Driving Motherfuckers from Niggertown.
I bet they didn't go with that one.
They said, no, that's not going to work for us either.
Let's go with the original one, right?
Yeah.
They
went with the title ended up being a clown in the moonlight, and it came from a Lon Chaney quote about his horror film method, which he explained as follows. He said, you go to the circus when you're a little kid and you see the clowns in the center ring, and they're really funny and they make you happy. But if you were home and it's the clock strikes 12 and the doorbell rings and you open it and there's a clown out there, there's nothing funny about a clown in the moonlight.
No,
I've not heard that story before, Jim, by the way, either.
Gacy, John Wayne. By the way, I saw a video the other day. One of the shooters, James Damore or something. One of the
James Damore was the Google guy who blew.
No, James. So another James guy. One of these guys who ended up like bug-eyed in court after shooting a dozen kids in the school. One of these big shooters.
Oh, the guy from Aurora, Colorado.
Yeah, Aurora. What's his last name? James.
I don't remember.
But I saw a video of him in high school, which was not long before it. And he did a science project. And first of all, he was very articulate, funny, comfortable in his own skin presenting it. And it was also a science project about implanting ideas.
Ooh.
And I'm going, oh, this is so creepy. So I occasionally use Twitter just to spew thoughts.
James Holmes is his name, Dave.
James what?
Holmes.
Holmes, yeah.
And he ended up in a psychiatric hospital.
Right.
For the criminally insane.
I tweeted, yes, I said, I keep hearing that college professors are nutty, pervy, unkempt, clueless, lazy, illogical, good-for-nothing, pot-smoking commies who spend the day licking themselves like cats. And I go, I want to be clear, I do not smoke pot.
I saw that one. That was good.
Yeah, I can't resist. Once in a while, I get one of these crazy ass ideas. I go, okay, I got to run with that one.
I want to share this with you guys. I got a headline here before we end to get your thoughts. BlackRock strikes deal to bring ports on both sides of the Panama Canal under American control. Did you guys see that?
Nope.
I did not see that.
A Hong Kong-based conglomerate, this is off AP News, has agreed to sell its controlling stake in the subsidiary that operates ports near the Panama Canal to a consortium, including BlackRock Inc., effectively putting the ports under American control after President Donald Trump alleged Chinese interference with the operations of the critical shipping lane.
They're so deep state, those bastards.
The deal valued at nearly $23 billion, including $5 billion in debt.
One thing you'd have to say about it is that it requires an awful lot of money. So, if not BlackRock, it's got to be some other deep-pocketed capital, flush company.
They'll have control over.
It's not surprising.
It's not going to be the Boy Scouts of America, right?
Yeah.
It's
not going to be a syndicate of 7 lawyers from Great Neck.
Right.
They'll have control over 43 ports in 23 countries.
Well, so the TikTok deals, I think, were much more bizarre than we thought. So, the TikTok story gets sold as China mining the brains of our children and warping them. I'm going, you mean instead of us? What the hell are you talking about? And then all of a sudden we tell TikTok you have to sell tell China you have to sell TikTok to us. I go, who gets to make that call? That seems insane. And then what you do is you start digging into it, and what you discover is that TikTok is a huge pro-Palestinian platform.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden you go, holy shit, the Israelis said you got to shut down TikTok.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, what a shocker.
But I don't blame them for it either.
Well, it's just statecraft. It's statecraft.
But all these platforms, though, and this was what Denninger and I were talking about yesterday with all this, how they even Twitter, I'm assuming Substack. I mean, they don't want you off of their algorithm. So even when you put a link to an episode, it gets no traffic. And they do that intentionally because they don't want you going from X to Substack to it's amazing how they keep you engaged.
I haven't noticed that. See, I haven't noticed that. I'll tell you a guy who I know is being shit on. There's two feeds that I can see being shit on. One is called Defiant L's or something, and they post funny, dark stuff. And they got something like 500,000 followers. And one of their tweets will get 11 likes. And that's just not mathematically possible. The other guy who gets the same thing is this Dr. Drew, who's got 2.5 million followers.
Well, he's the TV psychiatrist who went from woke to MAGA.
Yeah, you've talked about him.
Right.
You've talked about him before, Dave, on here about
right.
Dr.
And
Drew.
I'm just gonna look at something that he posts. Right. I'm gonna find a Dr. Drew thing. He posts it, and here he posts something, and he's got 22 likes. The goddamn guy has 2.6 million followers. I could post a picture of a dog taking a dump and get more likes than that.
Have you guys seen the new hot handle on Twitter, or at least in our world? It's called the Retard Finder. And I find retards.
Yeah. And he keeps showing pictures of people and he goes, here's another
I found you.
Is that his handle on Twitter?
Yeah, it's Retard Finder, but it's I find retards is the at.
Which one is it?
At I find retards.
I gotta go.
Oh, it's so funny.
And then the other one that's gotten huge legs is this data Republican chick.
Oh yeah.
Supposedly, who knows who she really is? There's a bunch of Twitter feeds that are really powerful. I'm going, I have no idea if that's just one person. Some goddamn.
I don't get how some
state committee.
I don't get how some of these are so. I don't get the whole cat turd. How that one evolved. I mean,
I think
Gunther Engelman
are on payroll. I think the memers run. The more I've thought about, the more I've concluded that it could even be it was Trump's genius. Could be Trump says get some guys out on social media hammering away on this shit. I wouldn't put it past Trump to put the memers on payroll. One of the
retard finder posts, he said, retard posting retarded things. Rick Wilson, Trump owes the people of America an apology for wrecking Joe Biden's booming economy. So he comes back with a retard posting retarded things.
It's so funny because all his posts, he goes, here's the pieces. I found one. It's great because they are absurd people. It's kind of like libs of TikTok, right? Yeah. In that sense.
Do you tune into Amy Therese?
I don't see her stuff anymore.
AIMEETERESE. No H.
I think
She's the greatest epigram writer on Twitter.
I don't even see her stuff anymore.
I'll send you a link if you can't find it.
I've got her.
She is one smart lady, whoever she is.
I never know if they're just one person.
Well, maybe not. Maybe it's a
so when Y2K,
maybe it's a whole writer's room.
Y2K, which I think was a legitimate looking risk.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a fraud, complete head to toe fraud. I think Silicon Valley sold it. I think the guys who were pumping it sold it, and it was to sell software and hardware.
Yeah.
And but there was a site, and old guys are going to remember this guy. This site, Time Bomb 2000, was the biggest chat board where you would go to find out the latest about some chip that wouldn't work or how to can butter or whatever, that sort of shit. There's a guy in there named Dexter, and he answered every goddamn technical question. He rebutted everything. And he never engaged. He never explained why he was there. There's no question he was a bank of feds saying, keep this crowd under control. right? Don't let this narrative get out of control. And so Dexter would always say, no, that chip doesn't work. Next thing you know, he'd be explaining something unrelated. And you go, that Dexter's a diverse guy, and he never seems to get any benefits personally from it. He doesn't get in arguments with people. And so I think he was part of, the deep state setting it up such that, keep these guys under control. Yeah, I got to Amy Therese. I gotta put her on my humor list. That's the key there.
She's very funny, yeah.
I have a Twitter entertainment list, which I go to late at night when I've got nothing left. And I just go through Twitter entertainment. That's where there's Boston Terrier videos and I see all of Darth Powell's videos because I had him on my Twitter entertainment feed. And the one thing we don't agree on, he comes at me against Trump and Ukraine absolutely relentlessly. And I don't even think we disagree that much on Trump and Ukraine. He's got the TDS thing going. And I don't know why. I'd be giving Trump a break right now. I'd be saying, okay, you're in power. Show us your stuff. But he's a great follow. He is a great follow. And he's very economically good. So.
What do you guys think? Wrap up?
Yeah.
Sure.
Dave, where can people find you?
David B. Collum under my desk. I don't know if I'll get you a link to post that I might ask you to post below this thing, but my son's main squeeze had a stroke. There's a GoFundMe-like site. Anyone listening to this is not going to give a shit about the guy because you don't know him. There's a million people who need help. But the pitch I'm going to make one way or the other is, to the extent I've probably written 2,000 pages and done thousands of podcasts and never asked for a penny, when I do post it, wherever I post it, whether it's on your site or not, I'm going to ask you to think of it as a Patreon page. And I've been paying the guys bills and stuff, I mean, I'm just asking people if you want to support me like a Patreon donation, this is the way to do it. And when I finally post this thing, and I'll shove it into the paws of some people with big follower accounts, just see if I can get some virality. Lastly, I'd like to remind people to support you, Mike. You spend so much goddamn. I don't think the average person knows how much effort you have to put into lining up podcast after podcast after podcast, and how much work it is, and so I think Jim would agree that backing you to the extent you can is a real good idea. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And do you have links to your Venmo account or to your Patreon account on Coffee with a Mike?
Yeah, so all my episodes, thanks to both of you guys, all my episodes have links to the ways you can contribute. So there's Venmo, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, and if people want to do subscriptions, I have Substack, Locals, Patreon. I don't think I missed anything. But Substack, I mean, I started using that based on my conversations with you. So yeah, so there's all the ways if people want to do monthly or if they just want to make a one-time donation. So.
And Dave, you didn't say what that Give Send Go site was.
I'm get. Let me see if I can pull it off of something real quick here. It's got to be posted. He's a musician. He's one of the nation's most prominent harpsichordists, and a harpsichordist and a stroke are a bad combination, I'm told. And he's going to have a ton of expenses. This is not describable. I'm going to have to just post it somewhere. I'll post it and have Mike put out a pitch in his Twitter feed or something.
Yeah,
or you can link it at the bottom.
Just send it to me, and I can do a separate post.
I'll send you a DM right now. I'll send you a DM. I haven't yet launched an effort to try to get this started. The musicians are doing a pretty good job for their own. And if he has money left over, my son and I have been talking about this. I think we're going to feed it back into the musicians group that has helped people. Like one guy lost his harpsichord in the fire in Palisades, things like that. So I think to the extent there's leftover, I think my son and his main squeeze plan on feeding it back into the musicians fund to help musicians who they're all broke, best I can tell. They're almost all broke. So when they hit hard times, they hit a wall hard.
Hard to make a living in the arts.
It is very hard to make a living in the arts, says the bank of dad who's trying to help a kid be a professional violinist.
Yeah.
Jim, where can people find you?
My blog is Clusterfuck Nation on Substack, and my blog's URL is actually just www.kunstler.com, and it'll take you to my site on Substack. And my books are on that too. And please, everybody, help support Mike Farris's operation here, and go to his Venmo, go to his various donation sites, and pitch in, because he does a lot of hard work.
I appreciate both you guys.
The hardest working man in podcast.
Yeah. In pod business.
Jim, when is your next podcast coming out?
Actually, I'm talking to Tom Luongo on Thursday.
Oh, do you want me to jump in to interrupt you?
In London. Ask him what's going on.
That's exactly what I want him to. I want to get him going on Keir Starmer.
Guys,
really wind him up. Yeah,
that'll wind him up.
Thanks for doing this, guys. I always enjoy these conversations. I look forward to continuing to read your work, and more conversations ahead.
You bet.
By the way, the markets gave it back at the end. They're back in the red.
Yeah. Mic drop.
So, Dave,